Chapter 18. The Edge of Catastrophe. They could not see where the fire came from, but out there, clinging to the rim of the dish, a massive bowl where the lake had been, with the huge superstructure above its center, they were sitting targets. Bullets clanged into the metal around them. Natalia flinched and lost her footing on the slippery dish, slick with water and algae. Bond tried to make a grab for her and failed, losing his own balance at the same time. They both slid down the basin, right to the center, which was the stump of the dish, like a large blockhouse with a sealed hatch on their side. The waterproof seal, Bond guessed, could be activated from either side, for there was a heavy spoked wheel in the middle. Presumably, he reasoned, there was an airlock beyond the hatch for the use of any maintenance staff. He grasped the wheel and began to turn, keeping his head down, expecting another fusillade of shots at any moment. There was a hiss as the hatch swung open, and he helped Natalia inside what appeared to be a chamber large enough to take 2 people. Another hatch with a wheel lay at the far end, so this had to be some kind of way in or out when the dish was below water. A minute later, they were through the other side of the hatch, making their way down a runged ladder, which, in turn, led to a pillared catwalk, circling the control room. He thought of the archives back at the military intelligence headquarters. This circular control room was built on the same principle, but on a larger scale and with insulated metal, tiles and walls that held monitors, together with other complex electronics. To their left were 5 or 6 long, high cylinders, which presumably provided fuel for internal generators. Below, on the bottom level, they could see Trevelyan and Boris seated at the firing console, and Trevelyan's voice came floating up to them. "On my count, Boris." Both men had their hands on the firing keys. 3, 2, 1. They turned the keys, and lights on the console started to wink from green to red. The display above read, "Weapon armed. Time to target. 00213226." Natalia and Bond seemed to be rooted, horrified, to the catwalk, watching helplessly as Trevelyan uncovered the firing button and punched it, then laughed. "God save the Queen!" Now, with a surge of anger, Bond knew that Trevelyan had targeted England, almost certainly London. He began to move, but Natalia caught his arm and pointed down to the middle level. A door had opened, and a technician, wearing a parka with a fur hood and gloves, emerged from what they could see was a large room. "The maintenance computer," Natalia whispered. "They'll have a cooling system in there. It'll be like a big refrigerator." She had hardly got the words out when they saw uniformed armed men heading up the steel staircase towards them. Bond pushed Natalia back into the comparative safety behind a pillar when the section of guards began to open fire as they reached the upper level. He fired 2 shots, and the first man on the catwalk spun around, grabbing air, and then the man behind him, so that the pair slid back down the stairs. Other uniformed men scrambled up the stairway and began to lay down withering fire. Bullets smashed off tiling, hit the fuel tanks, or ricocheted from the walls. Bond attempted to return fire, but he was hopelessly outnumbered. He glanced around to assure himself that Natalia was all right, but she had gone. He peered around and thought he saw a figure somewhere below the catwalk, dangling and moving hand over hand directly underneath. Natalia had quietly run from behind the pillar, taken a peep at the underside of the catwalk, and seen that a series of rungs ran directly along it. Now she was hanging from them, reaching out and grabbing, moving from rung to rung, heading towards the door that led to the mainframe computer room. Staying as close as he could to the wall, Bond ducked behind the first long fuel tank, slid his hand into a pouch on his belt, and drew out one of the small magnetic mines that Q had sent in the briefcase. Fuel was dripping from the bullet holes, and he dodged back, loosing off another couple of rounds, then attaching a mine to the next tank. He continued, firing and retreating, giving himself time to place the electronically controlled mines under the tanks. This continued until Bond realized that his pistol was empty, and he would have to take the chance that Natalia was about to do something very constructive. Hopelessly outnumbered, he threw his automatic out onto the walkway, placed his hands above his head, and walked out to face the knot of troops, hoping they at least had the discipline to cease firing. As he moved out, he caught a glimpse of Natalia dropping from the underside of the catwalk and landing by the door which led into the mainframe computer room. He took his eyes from her for a second and faced his captors. When he glanced down again, she had disappeared. Her breath immediately condensed in the freezing atmosphere of the mainframe room. Natalia glanced around. Without protective clothing, she could only last for a few minutes in this place, so she hurried over to the long plastic keyboard, grabbing at the chair set in front of it. Immediately her fingers touched the metal on the chair, they froze, and she had to pull them off, ripping skin from her hand as she did so. Behind her she glimpsed the large stainless steel vats, each bearing the international "Do Not Touch" symbol with a -200-degree mark. Liquid nitrogen, she thought, the coolant for the mainframe, keeping it at a steady, very low temperature. Carefully, Natalia seated herself at the plastic keyboard and began to work. On the highest walkway, the section of troops to whom Bond had surrendered were frisking him, making him lean with his hands flat against the wall. From this position, he could clearly see the mines he had set under the fuel tanks, their little red lights winking to show they were armed and would detonate once he used the watch on his left wrist. He tried to distract the men patting him down by keeping up a stream of abuse and turning his head away from the tanks. They found no further weapons on him, so eventually Bond was frog-marched down the 2 flights of steel stairs and up to the console where Trevelyan worked with Boris. "James!" Trevelyan turned in his chair, speaking in an almost jovial manner. "What a damned unpleasant surprise." "I always aim to please, Alec." Trevelyan raised an eyebrow. "I suppose that's the difference between us. I aim to kill." His eyes hardened. "Where's the girl?" "We're not seeing each other right now." "Really? My people said she was with you." He turned to the guards. "Find her. She has to be in here somewhere." 2 of the men left quickly. The other 2 remained with Bond, placing the contents of his pockets on the console in front of Trevelyan. As they did so, Bond carefully scanned the monitors. He took in the long scrolling line of transfers from the Bank of England to various banks throughout the world. Then he felt his stomach lurch as he saw the global screen with satellite Misha over Spain on a direct course for London. The countdown clock kept going, standing at the moment at time to target 00:15:07:39. He had around a quarter of an hour to stop what would undoubtedly be the greatest catastrophe ever to befall his country. With this kind of urgency, there was only one thing he could do. Without being too obvious about it, he let his right hand drift over to his left wrist. If he activated the mines under the fuel tanks, everyone would die, and the satellite would eventually drift down and burn out without firing its nuclear bomb to produce an electronic pulse over the capital. He took in the fact that an elevator stood, with doors open, to the far left of the console, next to a technician who was monitoring the guidance system. Trevelyan was sorting through the pocket litter on the console. Keys, money clip, pen, coins. He gave the pen a quick examination, even clicking it once, scribbling with it on a pad before clicking it off again. Bond was relieved when he put the pen back on the console. A few more clicks, and he would not even have time to activate the mines. Trevelyan's hand suddenly shot up to Bond's left arm. "The watch, please, James." Yanking it from his wrist, then examining it with an indulgent smile. "How is old Q doing these days? Up to his usual tricks, I suppose? I see you have the new model." Slowly, he turned it over to reveal a tiny red pinpoint winking on the underside. "I still press here, do I?" He pressed the stem and then the small button to the right. The red light immediately stopped winking, and Bond knew that the arming devices in the mines themselves would also blink off and revert to their deactivated mode. He wondered how much fuel was still leaking from the tanks, and reckoned that it would be a fair amount, running down the catwalk, dripping all the way down to this, the lowest level. In the mainframe computer room, Natalia, shivering with cold, typed as rapidly as she could, and had all but completed her instructions when the two guards burst in on her. She managed to hit the enter key, banging it hard, before they dragged her from the chair and led her off, down the stairs to where Bond stood under guard, and Trevelyan sat smiling happily. Boris continued with his work on the keyboard. Above, the global screen showed Misha gradually moving closer to its target, and Bond looked from the screen to Natalia being brought across the floor. To his pleasure, he saw the guards' boots left damp stains as they marched towards him. The fuel must be spreading both ways. Before the little party reached the console area, Bond relaxed. "Interesting little setup you have here, Alec. I see that you break into the bank via computer, and then make certain large sums of money are transferred. I presume just seconds before you activate GoldenEye, which, of course, erases all records of these transactions, together with the entire target. Very ingenious." "Thank you, James. High praise indeed, coming from you." Bond gestured with his head. "Still nothing but petty theft, Alec. In the end, you're nothing more than a bank robber, a common thief, a common murderer also." "Hardly, James. You always did have a small mind. You see, it's not just a question of bank records." His eyes, now like a stormy sky, scanned Bond's face. "It's everything in every computer in Greater London. Tax records, the stock market, credit ratings, land registries, even criminal records." He looked up at the countdown clock. "In 11 minutes and 1 seconds, the United Kingdom will once more enter the Stone Age." Followed by Tokyo, Frankfurt, New York, Hong Kong. A worldwide financial meltdown. He looked as though he pitied Trevelyan. "All so that mad little Alec can settle a score with the world 50 years on. so you can settle an injustice done to your ancestors. Oh, please, James, spare me any Freudian analysis. I might as well ask you if all those vodka martinis ever silenced the screams of all the men and women you've killed. He looked past Bond to the guards bringing Natalia towards them. Or do you find your forgiveness in the arms of all those willing women? He slammed his hand hard on the console. England is about to learn the final cost of betrayal. Natalia had been brought close to them now. Welcome to the party, my dear Natalia. Boris, hearing her name, swiveled his chair and saw her. Natalia? He sounded shocked. This isn't one of your games, Boris. Real people are about to die, you contemptuous little bastard. She shrugged free of her captors and took a step forward, her palm hitting him hard on the left cheek, and then a backhander to the right. They roughly pulled her back, and in the tiny skirmish, the pen, given to Bond by Q, rolled onto the floor. Boris slowly reached down, picked it up, and began to click it on and off. Bond watched him, fascinated by the clicks. Click, click. One more, and the device would be armed. But Boris merely started to roll the pen between his fingers. Where did you find her? Trevelyan asked her guards. She was in the mainframe, sir. Trevelyan scowled, then snapped at Boris. Check the program. Boris chuckled. She couldn't put a bug in a simple game, let alone damage us. She's a moron. A second-level programmer. Anyway, she doesn't have access to the firing codes. All she knows about is the guidance system. As he said it, Boris seemed to slow down, slurring the final words, and at that moment an alarm began to beep, as though someone had tried to break into a car. A technician sitting at the far monitor all but shouted, "Retro rockets firing!" It was time for Natalia to smile, but Bond kept his eyes on Boris, who now resumed clicking the pen. 3. The pen was armed. A further 3 times, disarming the pen. Boris leaped across to the technician, hammering at the keyboard with his right hand. She's at 97 miles and falling. I can't regain control. What the hell is going on? Trevelyan was up on his feet and moving towards Boris and the technician, who looked bewildered. We'll have a re-entry in 13 minutes. As he reached forward to set a re-entry clock. The timer flashed on in brilliant red digitized figures, and the time to target now read, aborted, time to re-entry, 13:24. In the stunned silence, Natalia spoke. It's going to burn up somewhere over the Atlantic. You little bitch! Boris was still trying to regain control from the technician's keyboard. He moved his head up to speak with Trevelyan. She's changed the access codes! As he spoke, Trevelyan, his face a rage, pulled his gun and stuck it in Boris's ear. Natalia giggled. Go ahead, Janus. Shoot him. He means nothing to me. Bond gave her a look of pleasure and muttered, Standard operating procedure. I can break her codes. Move that damn gun away, Alec. Boris flapped at the pistol as though it were an insect, then turned back to the technician. Load the guidance subroutines. Now! Quickly! Then he started playing with the pen again. Click, click. Click, click. Then a whole series of clicks so that Bond lost count, just as Trevelyan took his pistol from Boris's ear and turned it onto Natalia. Tell him! You hear me, girl? Tell him! Boris was out of control, whirling and screaming at Natalia. Give me those codes, Natalia! Give me the codes! Bond had no idea of the status of the pen that the crazy little computer specialist was waving in Natalia's face. He lashed out with one arm, sending Trevelyan's gun up and out of the man's hand. He then brought his foot up in a kickboxer's stance, kicking Boris's wrist and sending the pen arcing into the air. For a precious second, it seemed to remain stationary in mid-air, then dropped, exploding just as it hit the spreading pool of fuel. The explosion and sudden leap of fire around them made hands and arms come up, all trying to cover their eyes from the sheet of flame which shot up the stairs and wall back to its original source. The first fuel tank exploded. As it did so, Bond grabbed Natalia by the arm and pulled her towards the elevator on their left. As he banged the door closed, they both almost felt the thud of bullets hitting the sliding doors. Can he really break your codes? Bond asked. He was aware of the urgency in his own voice. It's possible, she said, almost casually. Then we'll have to destroy the transmitter. His head tilted up, watching the numbers rise. He could only presume this would take them right to the top of the damned thing. That would be natural. She lifted one eyebrow. By the way, thank you, I'm fine. Good. The elevator stopped at the base of the catwalk, which led to the transmitter cradle they had seen as the whole structure rose from the lake. An armed guard turned towards the opening doors and saw the woman slumped on the floor. He immediately ran into her, dropping his machine pistol on his way in a hurry to help her. As he began to kneel down beside the unconscious body, Bond dropped from the roof, where he had lodged himself, using shoulders and feet, like a climber in a chimney rock formation. First his feet hit the guard's back, then he chopped viciously at the man's neck, which gave off a horrible cracking sound as he fell, spread-eagled, to the floor. Natalia was on her feet again as Bond removed the guard's pistol and threw it to her. He picked up the machine pistol, and as he did so, they both heard the rumbling of explosions from far below. Do you know how to use one of these? Looking at the gun he handed to Natalia. She nodded, checking the slide movement, ejecting the magazine and making sure it was full. Yes, she said. Good. Just keep out of sight and get off the dish. I'm going to scupper that antenna. That will do the trick, won't it? Just get up there to the maintenance hatch. There's probably a simple chain device which works the mechanism to turn the antenna. The best thing for you to do is remove all the fuses from the maintenance room. Go! Go now, quickly! From below, more explosions rattled the dish and the superstructure as Bond kissed her on the cheek and started the long climb up to the maintenance room high above the antenna.